Good morning. I love seeing all the welcoming. It's my pleasure to welcome you here, whether you've been here for years or this is your first time or just a couple weeks. I'm glad you're here. You may or may not know, I am not normally up on this stage, so I appreciate being welcomed up here. This is not what I typically do. I'm not on the pastoral staff here. A couple times a year, they welcome me to come up and talk. My name's David Humeston. What I normally do for a day job is I work as an engineer at Electric Boat. So as we walk through the book of John, and we're at the fifth sign, Jesus' miracle of walking on the water, it's a little out of my comfort zone because even at work, I don't even like my boats to stay on top of the water. That's a problem. If we can't sink in a controlled fashion, we have a problem. So what we're doing is we're continuing in the book of John. And if you've been here a while, you realize what we're seeing is John as a gospel. John is explaining the story arc of how Jesus is who he said he is. That is the Son of God. And we get here to this fifth sign, which is his walking on water. But I think what we have to do is look at this with a fresh set of eyes. Because as unheard of as it was then to be walking on water, as ridiculous as it is now to try to execute that, it's kind of become a part of our language, our vocabulary. If you talk about walking on water, you know what we're talking about. You know that you're comparing that Jesus walked on water. So even though it's only 6 verses, it's a very small passage, but there's so much going on. It's very powerful, and it's very personal, is what I found. And so I'm hoping that we can look at it with a fresh set of eyes and see things that you might not have seen or felt before. And to me, the biggest thing here is the fact that in this situation, the disciples who were in this situation to meet Jesus walking on the water didn't have an accurate perception of Jesus, and that's why they were afraid. So, thinking of relationships and maybe not having the right expectation, I want to tell you a story about someone. George Frederick Heckler, or if he's your grandfather, my pop-pop, which is a Pennsylvania Dutch term. To me, he was pop-pop. He's the older, good-looking gentleman. I'm the one chomping on the pair of keys. I don't wear footies like that anymore. So at this time, I was the first grandson, and he was super excited to have number one, right? And what strikes me is that my mom loves telling this story, that when I was whatever toddler age is, I was his shadow. He was my buddy. Wherever he went, I went. If he went, I followed. And he loved this attention, but the problem is it got a little tiresome. So one morning, he just decided, I just want a break, just a little bit of breathing room, okay? So he quickly went into the kitchen ahead of me, hops up on the counter, pulls his legs up Indian style, and as far as a toddler's concerned, disappears. I come running in, scan for my pop-pop's knees. No knees. Sadness. Tears come out. Look up. There's the sun. There's my pop-pop. There he is. And that's where we started, with this cool relationship of buddies. But like so many relationships, it didn't stay that way for my whole life. I'll tell you more about how that was. And I want us to feel what it's like to have an appropriate relationship and how it gets messed up if you don't have that. So my goal today, we'll talk about setting the stage for what's happening. We'll talk about the storm. We'll talk about the encounter with Jesus. That's where we'll spend most of our time. And finally, this arrival on the spot. And our goal here is to, as we walk through John, we're also going to touch on the other Gospels. That's in your bulletin in Matthew 14 and Mark 6. We'll be jumping around a whole bunch. But mostly I want you to see what John is building in the book of John as his case for Jesus, the Son of God, and how it's personal and applicable. We don't want to miss out on who Jesus is. That's the punchline. So before we get into the word, let's pray. Our Father, it's our privilege to come before you. Thank you for giving us your word, for capturing it so that we could enjoy it, so that we could see truly who you are and learn from others' experiences. We invite you here in your presence in the name of your Son, Jesus, who loves us and came for us. Amen. So as we continue in the book of John, we pick up the story in John 6, 16 through 21. There's only 6 verses here. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. So we need to set the stage. You've got this situation that happens at night, but it begs the question, where are we in the story arc of their relationship, and where are they on the day of this night? In John's case, he explains to us that in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. In the beginning, Jesus was with them. And then he talks about how John the Baptist came along to prepare the way to share this, to explain that to people. But John wasn't the Messiah. He was just preparing the way. And then as Jesus comes onto the scene, we see that he goes through a series of miracles or signs. This will be the 5th sign. And the point of a sign is to show that you have the authority of God, to say, I have the power to do this. If only God has power, and I'm doing the powerful things, I'm sent on his behalf, and it validates who he says he is. So we have a series of signs. He turned water into wine at the wedding. He heals an official's son. He heals a man who for 35 years couldn't walk at the pool in Bethesda. And finally, what happens at the beginning of this day is the feeding of the 5,000. And what we'll see after that in the weeks to come is that Jesus proceeds to give several I am statements, saying what he is, who he is, what he's compared to explain to us who he is, and that he is the Son of God. So what's kind of interesting about on the water today, what's happening in this particular night, what happened in the day that brought us to this night? What we have is, we just had the finish of the feeding of the 5,000, which was amazing. And you have to understand that it wasn't just 5,000 people. The way they recorded situations like this is that it was 5,000 men, which meant that there were likely 15,000 or 20,000 total people, men, women, and children. And this was so shocking and amazing that at the end, the crowd was all riled up and excited. We'll see what that means. So what you have now is you have a day where this bread miracle, where out of 5 loaves and 2 little fish, which were likely pretty much sardines, they fed 20,000 people, but we didn't get a chance to explain it. We have what happens now, and then what will happen tomorrow is the explanation. Jesus hasn't explained that miracle yet to either the disciples or the crowd, which occurred to me that what we have is between the feeding of the 5,000 with the bread and the explaining of Jesus being the bread of life, we're sandwiched right in between 2 bread stories. And if you like Oreos, you know that all the good stuff is right in the middle. I'm a nerdy engineer. What happened that day was it was during the Passover, and that explained why there were so many people. And they would have been thinking of what the Passover meant and thinking back on Egypt and the Passover story. We'll see more about that. And it had a tense end. Even though 5,000 people, 15,000, 20,000 were fed, they were super excited by this miracle. What we see in John just before this passage is important. John 6:15, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. The crowd was so excited by this miracle where they all ate and were fed. They wanted to make him king now, not be unrule under the Romans, but to have the Jewish king be there, the one promised, but in whatever way they had in mind. So now we get to the storm, the situation. I'm going to read the first part to set the situation, but I don't want us to gloss over it. So often we just read it like it's words, and we don't put ourselves in the situation. So as clues to pay attention to what's going on, let's pay attention for what's happening. The people, the place, the timing of things, and the details. When evening came, the disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, and we're going to stop there, I wish I could just paint you the picture of what this feels like, if I could get you to feel like you were there in that situation. I have to believe that as we see from the beginning, where Jesus is up on the mountain and they're alone. So they're separated from him. That's what's going on. It's dark, and so they're going out on the boat. But I have to believe that the darkness wasn't too much of a problem. Remember that Peter, Andrew, and Philip were all from Bethsaida, which is this area. So this is their stomping ground. They're familiar. Furthermore, Peter, Andrew, James, and John are all fishermen. So night fishing was not a surprise to them. They're fairly comfortable. So I have to believe they're talking in the boat about the excitement. Could you believe what happened? Can you believe that we were part of this miracle? That we've somehow helped feeding 15,000 people? I've never seen anything like that. That's greater than the miracle with the healing and the wine. It's amazing. Maybe Jesus will become king. Maybe we'll shake off Roman oppression. And I have to believe that's what they're thinking about. But while that's happening, the winds start to rise. And what you have to know about the Sea of Galilee is like so many seas that are right on a mountain, the wind comes down off the mountain with almost no notice. There's no predicting it. And all of a sudden you get these big, big storms. And I'm thinking the excitement of the day starts to drop. They're starting to wonder, whoa, we had a long day, but what is happening? Are we in trouble? It says a strong wind was blowing. In the other accounts, Matthew says it was buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. In Mark, it says they were straining at the oars because the wind was against them. And this has been a while. This didn't just happen. They've gone 3 or 4 miles. Sea of Galilee is only about 8 miles wide, so that could mean that as they're going from the middle to the top, it's been a while. They've been fighting the rain. They're not getting anywhere. They're straining at the oars. Matthew says that the boat was already considerable distance from the shore, and Mark says that the boat was in the middle of the lake. So now they've been at this. And if you've ever rowed 3 or 4 miles in the wind, you know that you're starting to tire. And it's late. Matthew says, before the next thing that happens, that it was shortly before dawn. Some versions talk about the 4th watch, which meant the 3 to 4 a.m. kind of range before dawn. So now I'm thinking, what is their state now that it's darkest? Are they tired? Are they discouraged? Have they come down from this emotional roller coaster of all day and feeding people? I wonder if they're wondering, where is Jesus? What is going to happen? Are we even going to get there? And then in the middle of that situation, they see something. They see something walking on the water. And the other 2 accounts of this say they thought it was a ghost. And they do exactly what I think you or I would do. They were afraid and they cried out. But when they cried out, they got an answer. It was Jesus. They get a response. Jesus says, "It is I. Don't be afraid." They were willing to take him into the boat, and suddenly it was calm, and they were on the shore. And I think we need to stop and breathe and relax, because I know that this is not something we normally do, okay? We made ourselves uncomfortable for about 3 minutes to get a sense for what might be going on. But this is not just a story. This is not a drummed up situation. This really happened to real people who lived it and felt it. And just like us, we don't always get the advance notice that a storm is coming, that it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be messy, and we're going to cry out. I just want to remember and connect to this, that this is real and this is personal. So before we go too much further, I got to ask, I don't know where you are today. You might be feeling like this place where you're in the middle of a storm, where you're asking, God, where are you? You seem separate from me. Are all the people that you see around you that you would want to help, that you might cry out to, do they look like ghosts? Are they unhelpful? Are they exactly the thing that might frighten you and not who you're looking for? Maybe even you feel like you blame God for your situation. Sometimes we're in situations where the consequences are from what we've done, but other times it has purpose. And if you look at Matthew's account of this, you can get a little clue that might direct that. Matthew 14:22 says, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd." So if that's what happened before when they went separate, it means that Jesus decided to send the crowds away, and he sent them on ahead. So that means they're in this situation because Jesus sent them there. which meant that he has put them in that situation. So sometimes we're in that spot, and instead of saying, thank you, we don't know what's going on, and we say, God, why would you put me here? But what's kind of interesting to me is you don't always know why you're there. Remember that the storm looked hard, the storm was scary, and they didn't know what was going to happen. That was the thing that seemed most dangerous to them. But the crowd that they left, which seemed exultant and happy, and the promise of exciting things to come, was actually the dangerous thing. If the people tried to take over and do things not God's way, but their way, and skip all of God's plan, and try to overthrow Rome with Jesus as a conquering king instead of a sacrifice for our sins, that would be a dangerous spot. And I have to believe that Jesus was protecting them from their desire to see him the way they wanted to see him and have a conquering king that they accepted and not a sacrificial king who would die. So from there, we move on to the encounter where they meet Jesus. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." Then they were willing to take him into the boat. So we had a couple things that happened here. First, he saw them. They were separated, without doubt, but they were not alone. Mark explains, later in the night, when the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on land, he saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. He wasn't hiding from the storm. He wasn't staying up on the mountain where it was comfy. He saw them, and he didn't just see them and stay out. He came down to them to be with them. I have to ask myself all the time, do I doubt that he sees me? Does it feel like this is a messy situation? If he saw me, he would jump in. Or do I think maybe he's not even looking? Maybe he's not paying attention? Because sometimes we get there because all we're doing is paying attention to the storm and not thinking about, does he see me? He's up there and I'm down here. So not only does he see them, he shows up. But you notice what happens when he shows up? What their reaction is? They were afraid. So you got to say, why would they be afraid? In the other two accounts, in Matthew and Mark, it says they thought he was a ghost. Why would they think he was a ghost? And I think it's because they didn't recognize him. And why would they recognize him? Now, you can't criticize too much, but I think they didn't recognize him because they weren't looking for him. And if you're not looking for something or someone, sometimes you miss them. So we can't be too hard on them because, first of all, they haven't seen too many miracles. It is totally out of the box for them to expect someone to walk on water. And even as they've seen these different signs that have come, everyone has amazed them more. When they had the feeding of the 5,000, it was more amazing them than the healing or the making water into wine. Obviously, walking on water is totally unheard of. We're used to hearing it as a phrase, but obviously not a common thing. I joined the YMCA a couple weeks ago. I tried it. It didn't work. I punched walk into my Fitbit. Didn't help me any. I got winded either way, even in the water. You can't walk on water. It just doesn't happen. It's shocking. It's extreme. There's no reason why if they saw a person walking on the water, they would have thought anything other than supernatural. And finally, it's been a long day and a tough night. I have to believe it was some kind of emotional roller coaster with the excitement of the day and seeing miraculous things and then being a situation they didn't expect, being away from Jesus and not seeing it because they weren't looking for it. And again, we can't criticize too much. I've only been married for about 10 months, and I've already learned that if I'm asked to get something in the fridge and I look and it's not there, it's probably there. If Hannah makes it very clear that it's behind the spinach and I look behind the spinach and it's not there and I say, it's not there, she says behind the spinach and she comes and finds it behind the spinach. If you're not looking or if you're emotionally out of it, you don't always see what's actually there. So I got to ask, are you looking for him? Am I looking for him in my situation? And do you believe that he'll show up? In James, when we're told to pray for wisdom, we see, If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave on the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. Sound familiar? And will you recognize him when he shows up? Are you in a place where you really wouldn't expect to see him? No matter where you are right now, sometimes we're in messy spots. And sometimes when you're in that mess, no matter what it is, addiction, shame, divorce, loss, financial mess, whatever it is, a hurt, a habit, a hang-up, I think that sometimes when we're in that spot, not only are we not looking for him because we don't expect him, because we say, this is too much mess. This is just garbage and dirt. And I'm not even sure I want him to come in here, because if he shows up, what's he going to do? I'm afraid he's going to say, how did you let this happen? If you had just followed what I had to say, you wouldn't be in this spot. We're afraid he's going to drop the hammer. So not only are we not looking for him, we're not asking him, and we kind of run more into the dark because we're afraid he's going to be critical. But that attaches to what's wrong. The problem is we don't see that that's not what he's like. He's not there to drop the hammer. He's there to come into the mess and join us. So we move on when he shows up to exactly what he says. He says, "It is I, don't be afraid." And that statement there, that situation is powerful, personal, and predicted. Obviously, it's powerful. It is unbelievable, unexpected that you would walk on water, to have the actual authority to say, storm, stop. Boat, transport. Obviously, it's powerful. It's a sign that says, I have the authority of God. I have the power to enforce over even nature. But if you stop at powerful, you miss the part that's personal. So I started telling you about Pop-Up, my grandfather. Now, we were buddies when I was little, but as I grew a little older, I realized in high school and college, he was very much an engineer's engineer, very precise, everything just so. So when I would join him and he'd be doing some kind of craft or woodworking, what I picked up on was the fact that it had to be precise, it had to be proper, it had to be exact. So what I saw of him was a stern person, a strict teacher, and all I could think of when I was spending time with him was, how do I do it properly so I don't disappoint him? And I missed all of who he was, the rest of him. I had an inaccurate perception. I appreciated and respected that he had skills, experience, and a high standard of quality, but I missed the personness, the personhood of him. And if we stopped there, that's the misperception that we would have of Jesus. It's personal. Although he says, "It is I," which by the way is the same words for I am, I feel like what he's saying is, it's me. It's me. I'm here. Have you ever seen the video? If you haven't seen it, I definitely encourage you to find it, of when the dad comes home after having his beard shaved, and his 1-year-old has never seen him without a beard. And despite this tidying up and how handsome he is, the kiddo just loses it. And the only thing he can do is, it's me, it's me. I'm your dad, it's fine. My dad did that once in the beginning of his marriage, and he grew it back, and it's always been there since. Jesus is saying, don't be afraid because I am here. I, your friend. I with the power of God. It's personal. And by the way, this wouldn't work if it weren't personal, if they didn't have that relationship. If I'm at work at EB and something is going horribly awry, and the president of the company shows up and says, don't worry, I'm here, that doesn't encourage me at all. That doesn't make me say, oh, I'm safe now. Because I don't have that relationship with him. It's not a reassuring thing if you don't have that personal relationship. Jesus is saying, I'm here. And one more thing that's really personal to me is this. Jesus is not a PR manager or a campaign manager who says, well, I'm not going to waste this much power and energy on just 12 people. I'm going to save this for 15,000 people. I'm going to make a big fuss. No, he spends it on who's here, his friends, the 12 disciples. Just with them. We have the benefit of knowing this story because of the sharing of it through the Gospels. But he did this miracle to them, with them, for them. And you know what he says? He doesn't say it'll be okay. He doesn't say it'll be easy. He just says, don't be afraid. It is I. I am enough. It will be okay. Not only that, it was predicted. This didn't come out of the blue. As shocking as it was that walking on water, remember the fact that this miracle from the breaking of the feeding of the 5,000 with the bread, it was Passover time, which explained why so many people were there. Passover was a remembrance of what happened in Egypt when the Hebrews were led out. That was the purpose of the remembrance, that God delivered them. And so I have to believe that in their head, they're thinking things like Passover, breaking bread, led out of Egypt, get to the Red Sea, pass through, and then get into the wilderness and have manna, more bread. So this is all rattling around in their head. So we can leave a lot of that till next week when Zach talks about what Jesus explains when he says, I am the bread of life. But here's something that just amazed me. This is not the only time we have talking about being on the water. In Job 9 in the Old Testament, when Job talks about who God is, he says, he alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. What shocked me was 2 verses later when he also explains this. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. When he passes me, I cannot see him. When he goes by, I cannot perceive him. Now look at what Mark says in this account when Jesus is walking on the water. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost and cried out. Only God can walk on water. But in the Old Testament, God hid himself because we couldn't handle seeing him because he was too big and too powerful. When Jesus comes and he walks on water, saying that he is God with this authority, he could walk by, but when his friends, the disciples, cry out, he doesn't walk by. He gets in the boat and he becomes personal and joins them. And we're going to see more of how this I am the bread of life, I am the way and the truth and life plays out in weeks to come. So finally, the point here is that Jesus is saying, appreciate who I am. I'm not so big that I won't be involved with you. And I'm not so small that I can't help you. And if we see him as something he's not, we miss out on the blessing of who he is. Finally, we get this spot at the end, right? We're almost done, and we read this, and we read the portions about how he walks on water, and he gets in the boat. But we forget this, like, extra bonus miracle, right? It's sort of like buy one, get one free. He walks on the water, and then whoosh, suddenly they arrive. And we don't hear a lot talked about that. So you kind of ask yourself, what is going on here, right? What is that? Now, I'll tell you what I think is, and I can't prove this, but this is just what it feels like. Certainly we see that Jesus never wastes a teaching moment, right? All through the Gospels, we see the way he interacts with people, and when a situation arises, he uses it to explain who he is and who his Father is and what it means to us. But don't get the idea that Jesus is only a school teacher, strict rules learning all the time. Remember the personalness of this, the closeness of this? I feel like he shows up, he calms things, and he says, I love you guys. Let's go home. Let's just get there. We've had a long day. It is just my pleasure to get there. And I think we have to understand that God loves to give good gifts. And sometimes we're too distracted focusing on the big teaching points that we forget that he just loves to pour out good gifts on us. And he describes that further when you talk about in Matthew, when he tells about giving good gifts to our children. He says, if you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him. I'll tell you what, that is personally, if we have kids, what I want. I want my kids to know that I love giving good gifts to them. And you know what that makes me think of? In this situation, when they were in the mess, right? Think about a kid. It's nighttime, it's dark, and you hear the floor creaking or the stairs creaking, and you think, it's a monster out to get me. I'm scared. Is it something under my bed? But then what happens? The very thing that you were afraid of, the monster, turns out to be your mom or your dad. The only one who you really wanted. The only one that can really help you. And how do they solve it? They don't always say there's no monster, but they always say, I'm here. I'm with you. That's the kind of feeling that I think we need to understand. And I feel like that's what the disciples saw when they were terrified, saw something unexpected, and realized that it was the only one that they needed. Which brings me finally to the relationship with me and my grandfather. After I got out of school and became an engineer myself, I realized that sternness, that professionalism, that perfectionism, that was not all of who he was. That was just one aspect of how he operated. So I learned that this guy was a silly, pun-loving, book-reading engineer. So we got along just fine. And so no longer did I think of him kind of like, instead of a grandfather, like an in-law. And that word doesn't even work because now I have in-laws and I love them. Instead of seeing him as a distant, exacting person, I saw him as a deep person who loved me. And it was my pleasure to explain that to people at his funeral when I summarized having gone from a buddy to a distant person to a joking brother. And Jesus invites us to be that close to him. And he wants us to know that he is as powerful as you could believe and strong enough to help and absolutely worth worship, but not so distant that he won't be involved. And if you invite him in to be involved with your life, he will get there no matter what the mess, and he will walk on water if he has to do it. So don't miss Jesus. He has the authority over everything, including your life and your storms, and he has personally shown us that he wants us to spend time with him. Finally, we say we don't want to miss him. How do we not miss him? Remember how we talked about when they left Egypt and they got to the Red Sea, which was almost like walking on water, but not as big? We get to my favorite verse, Exodus 14:13. We find that the Israelites, when escaping after the Passover, faced the Red Sea and were terrified because the Egyptians were behind them, chasing them down to kill them. And God says to Moses, Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." And some versions say, "Watch for the deliverance I will bring you today." So my prayer is that we can watch and really look to find Jesus for who he is and not for the small amount that we make him out to be. Join me in prayer as we get sent out. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the greatness of you, how you are bigger than anything we can fathom or imagine, bigger than space and time, before us and after us, and that you didn't leave it at that. You sent your Son to the earth to be involved in our lives, to get into our storms, to ride the boat with us, and to say, you're here. Don't be afraid. Not because it's going to be easy, but because you're with us, and you are enough. We thank you and praise you for that. Ask for your blessings here. In your Son's name we pray, amen.